At the end of the 20th century, between 1980 and 1986, the Icelandic researcher Erlendur Haraldson undertook an ambitious study of the phenomenon of postmortem visions, the results of which formed the basis of his scientific article, Alleged Encounters with the Dead. This study, far from being the first of its kind, but distinguished by its scale and methodicality, has become a significant contribution to parapsychology and the study of experiences related to death. Haraldson and a group of colleagues used an innovative approach for that time, combining questionnaires with subsequent in-depth interviews. The questionnaire, consisting of 86 carefully designed questions, was distributed to readers of 5 popular Icelandic magazines covering a wide range of demographic groups. The questions concern not only the fact of the deceased's vision itself, but also details: time of day, circumstances, appearance of the vision, emotional state of the witness, accompanying phenomena, sounds, smells, sensations. The goal was not only to collect evidence, but also to analyze the context that could shed light on the nature of these experiences. The response to the questionnaire exceeded all expectations. A third of the readers participated, providing the most valuable material for analysis. Each certificate received has been the subject of careful study. Haraldson and his team conducted face-to-face conversations and telephone interviews, and all conversations were recorded on tape to ensure maximum accuracy and avoid information distortion. Detailed recording of the data, including the verbal and nonverbal reactions of the participants, allowed Haraldson to conduct an in-depth qualitative analysis. Moreover, the interviewers received special training to minimize the impact of the expectation effect on the respondents, an important aspect that is often ignored in such studies. In his article, Haraldson presented 337 detailed cases of visions of the dead, emphasizing that this is only a small part of the more than 10,000 collected testimonies. This impressive amount of data indicates that such experiences are widespread only in Icelandic society. Processing such a large amount of information required the use of statistical methods, which allowed us to identify certain patterns. Haraldson noted that in many cases the visions occurred with the eyes open, which contradicted some popular hypotheses linking such phenomena with hallucinations or sleep paralysis. One of the striking examples given in the article is the story of a worker from an Icelandic factory. This newly arrived worker saw a figure in the workshop that he initially mistook for a colleague. The man was standing at the machine, but when the worker approached, the figure disappeared. After telling colleagues about the incident and describing the man he saw, the worker learned that it was the ghost of the former factory director, known among employees for his rigor and exactingness. He told me, "When I told my colleagues about this incident and described to them the man I saw, they began to claim that it was the ghost of the former director of the company who was seen by other workers. A few years ago, the director decided to pass away in his office." Another story told by a participant in a parapsychological study still gives me goosebumps. February 1960. The man took his seriously ill wife to the hospital. He visited her the same day, remembering her in a simple blue nightgown. The promise to return in the morning was not fulfilled. The night brought tragedy. The woman died. The next day, overcome with grief, the husband went home, where his daughter-in-law was preparing for the funeral, choosing a dress for the deceased. Having retreated to his room, he was experiencing a loss when the incredible happened. His wife appeared in front of him as if illuminated by an unearthly light. The light was oval in shape, bright, white, but not blinding. But the most striking thing was his wife's outfit, a pink fancy dress which she rarely wore on special occasions. The man claims that he experienced a shock, after which the vision disappeared. He later found out that it was this pink dress that his sister-in-law had chosen for the funeral. Another case, told to Erlendur Haraldson, also indicates possible contact with the other world. A young girl who rented a small house in Reykjavik felt the presence of someone in one of the rooms from the very first evening. It wasn't an unpleasant feeling. Rather, she felt a benevolence, a warm, soothing presence. Over time, the feeling of presence intensified, developing into something more tangible. The girl began to see her invisible guest, although he remained invisible in the usual sense. She had the feeling that a ghost was asking her for prayer. One day, when this girl was paying the rent, the landlord asked her if she had noticed anything strange. The girl told about the ghost. The owner of the house asked to describe this man and was very surprised by what he heard. He said that once in the room where the girl saw the ghost, a man who perfectly fits the description decided to pass away. Erlendur Haraldson's research on the phenomenon of postmortem phenomena revealed a curious pattern. The second most frequent cases are those accompanied by sound phenomena, voices, noises, and various sound effects perceived by witnesses. These sounds, as a rule, are not random, but carry a certain semantic load, often associated with a deceased person. One of the most impressive examples described in Haraldson's work is about a young fisherman. This sailor, as a teenager, fished alone on a small boat. Suddenly, he heard a clear, commanding voice ordering him to drop the fishing rod and row to shore. The description indicates the extraordinary clarity and persuasiveness of the voice that forced the young man to obey. This suggestion contradicted common sense, because the weather was clear. However, obeying an incomprehensible voice, the fisherman began to row towards the shore. His act turned out to be life-saving, because almost simultaneously with reaching the shore, a powerful storm broke out, which undoubtedly could have led to the death of the young man in the open sea. The sailor emphasized that the voice was unfamiliar to him, but only after some time did he realize that this voice strikingly resembled the voice of his recently drowned brother. This case vividly demonstrates the semantic component of sound postmortem phenomena. The voice, as if being the messenger of the deceased, warned of impending danger, saving the life of the witness. Another piece of evidence, documented by Haraldson, describes sound phenomena related to the habits of a deceased person. After the death of his 85-year-old father, his two sons, returning home, heard characteristic sounds in their father's office: the shuffling of feet on the floor and the creaking of the door opening and closing. These sounds, according to the description of the witnesses, exactly corresponded to the habits of the father: the slow, shuffling gait of the old man. The sons, deciding to check what was going on, went upstairs, but the office was empty. This testimony clearly shows how sounds that reflect the habits of the deceased can serve as a kind of ghostly manifestation of his presence. Such sounds, as a rule, do not carry an obvious threat, but rather are a reminder of the departed person. Haraldson notes that such sound phenomena are often accompanied by other paranormal phenomena, such as temperature changes, the appearance of cold wind, or sudden odors associated with the deceased. For example, in a number of cases, the researcher recorded the appearance of a perfume characteristic of the deceased, or the smell of his favorite cigar. These phenomena, as a rule, accompany sound manifestations and enhance the general feeling of the presence of the deceased. Another story, told by one of the survey participants, poignantly describes a sudden sense of presence that occurred a few months after her mother's death. The woman was sitting at her desk, immersed in routine tasks. Suddenly, in the silence that was interrupted only by her own actions at the keyboard and perhaps the barely audible noise of the computer, she felt a light touch. Gentle, almost weightless, like a breeze, but at the same time palpably real. A hand was laid on her shoulder. At first, she thought that someone from the household had approached her. She looked around but saw no one. Then she realized that the hand that touched her was cold. Realizing that it couldn't be anyone alive, the woman jumped up from her chair in horror. However, then she felt that someone wanted to comfort her in this way. Later, the woman assumed that it was her mother, but nothing like that ever happened to her again. A study by Professor Erlendur Haraldson on alleged encounters with deceased people in Iceland has revealed striking similarities with the results obtained by British researchers at the Society for Psychological Research more than a century ago. This similarity, despite the significant temporal and geographical distance between the studies, indicates the universality of the phenomenon. The findings seriously cast doubt on the widespread explanation in academic circles of such visions as simple hallucinations. This simplified interpretation, as both old and new studies have shown, is not able to adequately explain the observed features of postmortem contacts. Haraldson and his team have collected and carefully analyzed many testimonies of meetings with deceased loved ones. This new collection of cases, in my opinion, further confirms the hypothesis of our postmortem survival. Professor Erlendur Haraldson concluded his article on alleged encounters with the deceased. Near-death experiences are another vivid manifestation of life after death. If you are in mourning after the loss of a loved one, who can comfort you and how? Philosophers, psychologists, and many scientists will explain to you that death is a part of human life, and the dead remain alive in their good deeds and our hearts. But it is unlikely that these words have ever comforted anyone. The only thing that can truly comfort a loved one is the thought that our soul is immortal and our life is eternal. To this end, I have collected information from a wide variety of sources that confirm that our lives inevitably turn out to be like this. Such work was done by the famous French scientist François Brune. This man combined all possible sources, including technical ones, indicating that death is just a transition to another form of life, that the deceased can be heard and even communicate with them. Perhaps, by far, the most common sources confirming our immortality are the stories of people who have experienced clinical death. Many people think that this phenomenon was discovered not so long ago. However, long before psychiatrist Raymond Moody spoke about his research on near-death experiences in 1975, a similar phenomenon was described by other doctors, noted François Brune. So during the Second World War, Professor Eckhart Wiesenhuttern recorded the story of a soldier. He was 20 years old. In 1915, a soldier was seriously wounded, and doctors managed to save him. However, when the young man regained consciousness, he was so badly shaken by something that he refused to talk. When Eckhart Wiesenhuttern examined this wounded man once again, he said, "Why did you do this?" After these words, the soldier told the doctor that he experienced a feeling of joy and freedom, passing away. Another story happened with soldier George Ritchie. One day, this young man got hypothermic and caught a cold. Ritchie had a high fever, but he did not think about going to the doctor, as he was in a hurry to visit relatives for the Christmas holidays. On the way to the train station, George Ritchie lost consciousness and ended up in the hospital. I woke up in the room in the middle of the night. Completely unaware of what had happened, I started looking for my things to go to the train station. I got out of bed and started looking around the room. My tunic was nowhere to be found. I decided to look under the bed. Maybe my clothes were there. When I turned around and looked at the bed, I saw a man on it. I thought, how is this possible? Because I just slept on this bed. Everything that was happening seemed strange to me, but I didn't have time to figure it out. It was only later that I realized that my body was lying on the bed, said George Ritchie, recovering. François Brune argued that there are more and more such stories nowadays, but they all concern people who have come back to life. However, there is one source that allows you to establish contact with those who have left irrevocably. François Brune referred mediums to this source. This story was told by French researcher Jean Prieur. It happened to a welder who died during a working day. But that didn't stop him from returning home, though without his body. He listened to his relatives mourn him. The deceased tried to talk to them, but it did not bring results. A neighbor came to the rescue, who turned out to be a good medium. This woman couldn't see him, but she could communicate with him mentally. She explained to the deceased that now he does not belong to this world. In the future, this worker continued to send messages to his earthly relatives. In one of his messages, he bitterly remarked, "It is a pity that people are not taught this. Silence on this topic is a crime. If people knew about their immortality, they would miss the departed less, and no one would experience the terrifying fear of death." François Brune has collected many similar stories that happened in France. The scientist said, "These stories confirm the existence of a connection between those who are still on Earth and those who have already left it." Another source that helped François Brune get confirmation of our immortality was the tape recorder. As an example, he cited several researchers who worked in this area in the second half of the last century. Among them was George Meek, a member of the New York Academy of Sciences. As a mechanical engineer, he was the author of numerous inventions. In 1970, George Meek met a medium who claimed that he was receiving messages from a deceased scientist who wanted to help living people establish contact with the departed. The tape recorder became a means of communication. George Meek was making a tape recording in the presence of a medium. The medium asked the deceased his questions, and when the recording was played back and listened to, George Meek discovered that not only the medium's questions were recorded on the tape. Someone's voices, which the engineer did not hear during the recording, gave short answers to these questions. In some cases, the deceased identified themselves on these recordings. Among them, for example, was the American physicist George Muller, who died in 1967 of a heart attack. He explained how to improve the equipment in order to reduce the level of background sounds during recording. Over the past few years, we have been able to receive reports that indicate that the deceased live in different conditions. So some voices left short complaints. We are being tortured here. There is punishment here. Others, on the contrary, rejoiced. There is eternal light around us. We live in a state of joy and rejoicing, George Meek said. At the same time, George Meek understood that these records could cause distrust among many people, since he himself had similar doubts at the beginning of his research. To dispel this distrust, the engineer organized press conferences, to which he invited scientists and journalists. At these meetings, George Meek demonstrated the equipment with which he communicates with the dead, as well as played excerpts of received messages. By demonstrating the results of his work, the engineer sought to involve other scientists in this research. At later conferences, he was happy to announce that he had gained followers in other countries. Francois Brune also spoke about another source that can serve as a means of communication with the dead. The scientist called this phenomenon rare because it occurs by itself and not at the request of researchers. It was about phone calls. Francois Brune was sure that for people reading these stories, life after death would cease to be a matter of blind faith and become knowledge. The scientist was convinced that over time, all people would possess this knowledge. He was saying, "Remember how in the old days, some people already knew for certain that the earth revolves around the sun, while others lived in ignorance. Even today, some people know that death is just a transition to a new life, while others, for some reason, do not have this knowledge." Francois Brune was so convinced of the existence of the soul and eternal life that at the end of his days he decided to become an Orthodox priest. In his will, he asked that the following inscription be written on his gravestone: "Father Francois, an Orthodox priest, I'm not here." And this wish was fulfilled. What do you think about the afterlife? Where do you think we will end up after physical death? Write your opinion in the comments. If you want to learn more about life after death, then I recommend watching my other videos. Please don't forget to like this video if you liked it. See you soon.